This episode was made possible by a decent internet connection. And that's it. Welcome to Several Stories High, an eclectic, electric anthology of fiction, fact, and everything in between. I'm your host, Nathaniel David Knox. Shall we begin? Oh, the day that's come to pass. The night. The hell. I feel I've just been lifted from an utter nightmare. Lifted, yes. On the wings of angels, perhaps. Of sweet seraphim. And yet, it seems I remember reading somewhere the famed quotation by C. Goodwin Huron, namely that some have demons, others are. But I fear I'm getting rather ahead of myself, so let us go back to the beginning, to mere hours ago, hours that seem like months, before I found myself as I am at present, shivering, bloodied, soaked to the bones and out of my wits. Yes, let's go back. Before the monster emerged. I was sitting on the edge of a freshly unearthed ravine with my weathered wading boots dangling over the edge, while I rubbed my stinging, blistering palms. 7 other men, as dirty and famished as I, were doing the same, our shovels protruding from the ripe soil behind us like thin, splintered headstones. "Remember, gentlemen, 10 minutes and not a blink more," said Jack Spellman firmly. He was the foreman of our little traveling Roosevelt-enacted work party, and so we all nodded and obliged with a, "Yes, sir." "Say, you think they got some so-deep pop at that there general store over yonder?" said John Gray, the sloppiest and silliest of our little cadre. "What kind you got a hankering for?" said Richard Bledsoe, a blond man of 34. "Dunno. Any of 'em, I reckon," John said. "Fine by me," Richard answered quickly. "Anyone else want to go?" The whole gang, minus myself, all lumbered up to their tired feet and patted the dirt from the rest of their weary bodies. I looked from my seated position to examine their destination. On the other side of a very thin patch of woodwork and across a 2-lane dirt road was a corner store waiting with the dual welcoming arms of refreshments and indoor shade. But alas, nothing, not even the sweet nectar of some World's Fair concocted soft drink could entice me on that day, for I was, in a word, beat, and I be staying put. "Want these matches?" Joseph Honeycutt said. I nodded. He tossed an old, unmarked book of said items, and I caught them. "Thanks, Joe," I said. He nodded and replied slowly with, "Better in your hands than mine, I guess," before slicking back his sweat-drenched dark hair. "Gotta get smoking. Gotta quit smoking. For the wife." After a few minutes of lingering by the tree line, Joseph casually strolled over towards the general store to join the others, leaving me alone with an unmarked book of matches as I sat on the edge of the freshly toiled trench. I ripped one of the tiny toothpick-sized objects from its native cluster and stared. Of all the vices inherited by we the people, I was a son of many, but tobacco smoking certainly wasn't one of them. No, I simply enjoyed the sight of the tiny dancing flame that those matches spit forth when swiped. I truly wish I was from the lot of men who espouse some sort of deep, personal metaphor for such fantasies, but I am not. Matchbooks intrigued me, and there was nothing more to it. I pressed the match to the side of the book and swiftly swiped. I held it to my eye. The tiny flame flickered and did not compete with the colossal glow of the blistering sun above. It was content in its own little glimmer until it slowly descended to the tip of my dirty thumbnail and was snuffed out by the 3 flicks of my wrist. Again, I ripped another native from the clump and struck, and I gazed upon it until it passed away too. Again, rip, swipe, flicker, fade. Again, rip, swipe, flicker, fade, flick. Again, rip, swipe, flicker. Something pierced the air and popped directly in front of my face. The match flew from my fingertips and I jolted so violently that I stumbled down into our fresh ravine. I was dumbstruck, too enraged to be frightened, and yet too shocked to leap back up. I laid in the fresh soil on my back, panting heavily and staring up at the sliver of blue sky between slabs of solid earth. Seems I heard someone say that it's not a safe thing to play with fire, came an embellished theatrical voice from over the side of the ditch. I did not know how to respond to such a call, and being a man of more than one altercation, I held my tongue tightly in that dark, cool soil. "Well?" said the voice in mock impatience. "You think we scared the critter speechless, my fair Fritz?" "Don't know, sir," said a low, chilling voice from the other side of the ditch. I waited silently, suspiciously. It was akin to lying in my own grave, hiding from some undesirable mourners or grave robbers. And then a man's face sprang forth that made me wince. His eyes were wide, hypnotic, and bearing a color that was difficult to decipher. His mustache curled upward with an eerie perfection, and his nose seemed to be a downward hook of cracked cartilage. "Sorry to startle you there, sonny boy." I stared up with a frown, puffing air and dirt from my nose. How did the man know my name? Of course, the name Sonny was a common nickname tossed to any young buck around, but nevertheless, a small part of me entertained the thought that he knew more than he let on. "Here," he said, extending a white-gloved hand down towards me. "Ugh, my manners," he said in more mockery. "Let me offer you a more suitable aid." When I opened my eyes in the aftermath of that same familiar pop, I finally saw what the cursed thing was. It was a whip. From the mocking man's white glove, it dangled down into the dirt, mere inches from my chest. But his hand, it looked like... "Go on, it'll hold." I grabbed onto the leathery limb-like strand. It possessed an uncanny solidarity. The man pulled, and whether or not his moans of exertion were mocks or true, I'm not sure. But either way, he pulled me up from the dark doldrums of the dirt, and back up into the human world I returned. Immediately in front of me stood the man with the whip. He looked positively outlandish, like a neatly dressed loon. Above his face and atop his crooked head was a black fedora, most likely of fine cashmere or beaver maybe. He brandished an upturned collar, around which a silky bright orange ascot was tethered. His suit, 3 pieces in all, was a fine rich gray, which somehow appeared both old and new. His white gloves were like silky snow. When I looked over my shoulder towards the other man, the one with the slow, chilling voice, I was truly impressed, if not altogether frightened. Across the trench, standing stiffly, assuredly, was the one whom I had to rear my head back to an abnormal angle to fully behold. I do not exaggerate when I estimate his height at 7 feet. His scalp was shaven to the bare skin, and his face also lacked a single hair. Even his eyebrows were bare, leaving only furrowed, wrinkled ridges of muscle and tissue contorted in a frown. My eyes lowered to his torso, which was in stark, striking contrast to his smooth face. From his chest all the way to both of his fingertips were tattoos of the most vividly inked details. Upon a muscular canvas of sandy skin, hatched packs of wild dogs ran down slopes of forearm. A watchful, baleful eye peered from its belly-button pupil with crisp crosshatches. Vultures floated all around wrist-bound carcasses, and ancient armadas, vast and militant, battled with an ancient and terrible sea serpent, whose flailing tentacles reached their crescendo amongst a razor-sharp wave at the man's navel. The only reason my eyes finally pried themselves away from the sea of ink was due to the clear contrast that the man's red and white suspenders provided, which were fastened to an old pair of gray trousers, draped atop well-worn boots of black. Sonny, old boy. Huh? What? I said, not knowing how long the whip man had been badgering me. I hope my antics didn't offend you, good sir, he said, using his white glove to dust me off. I just wanted to get your attention, no matter the cost. Yes, well, I said rather shortly. Most folk just offer a light tap on the shoulder. I could have done without the whip, Mr. Conundrum. Conrad Conundrum. I said, my hand shaking his, much to my surprise. Conundrum. Haven't heard that one before. But had I? I thought to myself. The name rang a bell. I continued. Well, Mr. Conundrum, pardon my forthrightness, but what do you want? I will answer that, he said as he removed his hat, if you will first answer me the same question. I spotted the rest of the crew filing out of the general store across the street. It was only a matter of time before they would be back, along with Mr. Spellman and more blisters to earn a buck. Look, I don't have much time for games and semantics, I finally told him. Just a simple answer is all I require, said Conrad, his hand hiding behind his gray coattails. What do you want, Sonny? I rolled my eyes. At that point, I'd say anything to get the loon away from me. I spoke. I don't know, what everyone wants. A decent wage, I suppose. Now please, leave me be or I'll... And before I could even turn back to face the man called Conrad Conundrum, something of prickly paper bounced off my right eyebrow. I caught it swiftly and was nearly ready for blows when I looked into my hand. It was a fresh, neatly folded dollar bill. For all the troubles that I caused you at this here trench, said Conrad, a silky smile across his face. I was speechless. That tiny bill was just over a full day's wage. I tried to speak, but I'll admit that I was both intrigued and intoxicated at this sudden gift. Just look at this, said Conrad, surveying the trench. Back-breaking work, sweating the skin right off your bones, and for what? A few lousy coins to help you perpetuate the skin melting? No. This is no way for people to work, to earn, to live. The crew was nearly within earshot. I shrugged my shoulders out of instinct, not wanting to attract their attention, certainly not Spellman's. It would be wise to heed his wisdom, said the shirtless man of tattoos from behind me. I did not look. I only quivered. You flatter me, my fair Fritz, said Conrad. Now, Sonny, do you want to keep testing that spine of yours? Or do you want to add a bit more flora to your freshly planted garden of greenbacks? Interested in stuffing some more money in those moth-filled pockets of yours? What do I have to do? I replied. All they had was root beer, Sonny. Can you imagine such an evil thing? Said John Gray before Conrad could answer, almost appearing drunk even though he held a half-filled bottle of the drink in question. Better than nothing, I guess. I quickly stuffed the dollar bill into my front pocket. Just in time, gentlemen, said Conrad, his voice inflection skyrocketing. Now, how many of you are quite through with the toils and labors such as these? The curses of such mediocrities? Shoveling dirt to eke out a living? Might as well be digging your own graves. Most of the men mumbled with interest. Did I miss something, lads? Said Jack Spellman when he emerged from the other side of an oak tree. Why, on the contrary, you're just in time, said Conrad, tipping his hat. He clearly recognized that Spellman was our leader. I was just informing these fine, strapping gents here about the opportunity of a lifetime. Not anymore, you're not, said Spellman coldly. Our government's not spending valuable tax dollars for these fine gents to listen to all the ramblings of some two-bit con artist. Now take a hike and let my men work. My word, said Conrad, staggering back, a white glove over his breast pocket. Barely 2 years into a new century, and this? Such insults? Such daggers to the heart? My, 1902 is feeling rather hurtful, to say the least. All heard the sound of grass rustling, and when we turned, we saw the tattooed giant cross the entire trench in a single, effortless step. And in one more, he was standing 2 feet away from Jack Spellman, and easily towering 2.5 more feet above him. Leave the dagger tossing to those of the trade, said the giant, merely shooting a glance at his trousers. All of us, Spellman included, glanced down at the 6 red knife handles that protruded from his waist all around. Had they always been there? If Jack Spellman were indeed intimidated, he certainly didn't show it when he barked. You and your circus freak have 30 more seconds. After that, I'll surely fetch the sheriff. Thank you, kind sir, said Conrad, clearing his throat for some sort of finale, conjuring even more unction than before. Serpent! Leviathan! Demon of the deep! His fervor was startling. There's been a legend, a bit of lore, if you will. A tale that has floated afoot in this county for years. Anyone have a hunch? We ain't from here, said John Gray. All the better, said Conrad, curling his mustache. According to the talk of these fine local folk, the residents of good old Wexler County to be exact, there's been a slew of old rumblings brewing about for generations. Rumblings of a ghastly creature that lurks in the dark waters of Lake Van Buren, not a half mile from this very spot. A creature so vile, so ghastly, that it's even been said that Satan himself tossed the thing back when he was fishing in his beloved lake of fire! We've got about 10 seconds, said Spellman, uncharmed. Very well. I'll make this last part real simple-like. Please do, said Spellman. I'm offering $3,000 to every man who joins me in my quest. Ears lit aflame all around at that magical number. What quest? Said Richard Bledsoe. Conrad Conundrum answered. Why, to catch the serpent, of course. Many snickered. But what are you gonna do if you catch it? John Gray said. All right, that's enough. You've had your snake oil demonstration, barked Spellman, his temper matching his reddened face. Now off with you. Both you freaks. Now. Come, Fritz, said Conrad, a convincing display of downtrodden sorrow. Let us leave the ants to their hill. Their sad little hill. The man with the whip and the tattooed giant both started walking towards a break in the wood. After more barks from Spellman, we all resumed our positions. Our measly, sweltering positions. Dig! Dig! Said Spellman, scribbling on some government map. We descended back into the earth, exactly where we left off. As shovel stabbed and soil slung, I could not keep my mind off the folded up bill in my pocket. I clenched my shovel, which sent splinters into my tiny balloon-like blisters. I was growing rather angry now. There I was, slaving away at a trade for the same amount of money that grazed my eyebrow in a matter of seconds. It was then that I made up my mind. It was no contest, truthfully. I knew nothing of this Wexler County or the loony legends that permeated through it, but I did not care. I lifted my shovel inside the trench for a final time. I yelled and drove it deep into the earth. I mounted the base and pulled myself out of the ravine just in time to see the inked back of the giant fading into the woods. Wait! I shouted as I leapt and trotted. "Sonny, one more step and don't you dare return," said Spellman. I stopped for but a moment. I saw the matchbook that I had dropped when I fell into the ditch. I scooped it up and put it in my free pocket. And then I was smitten by the eyes. The weary, baggy, glaring eyes of all the fellow toilers that were peering out at me from within the trench just above the line, like sad little prairie dogs. I nodded to they and they alone and turned past Spellman. Then I dashed towards the break in the woods. When I finally broke through the weeds and withered trees, I stopped. I needed not run any longer. There, upon the beaten path, and standing in the shattered shade stood the whipman and the giant, both facing away from me, and both of whose postures screamed silent expectancy. "Here he is," said Conrad, grinning and turning to face me. "I knew that the more primal forces would stir you this way." I nodded and placed both hands on my hips. "I'm here, and I'm ready," said I. "As long as you got the money, you got me. Lead on." "Prodigious. And indeed lead I shall." He raised a white finger. "But first," he sniffed the air mockingly, "the stragglers, the debaters, those wayward fickle fiddles who had to play games of weights and measures, rights and wrongs, have and have-nots." I stole a peek at the giant. He looked as if Conrad had just spoken into his very soul. In any case, the silence between the breaths was strange, and I dare not break it. A tad longer. A pinch to go. A dollop more sand from the hourglass's flow. And we stood. Closer. Closer. Again, I say closer. The boot stomps beckon. The impartials are impending. The new bloods are near. A tablespoon of courage, a smidgen of fear, and... Just as I felt as if the sky might fall, cloud by rabble-roused cloud, the deep booming sounds of tattered boots indeed beckoned at the tree break behind me. I reared around. There, panting in the shattered haven of the shade, was a trio of eager men, freshly burst blisters simmering upon their trousers, as their hands rested upon tired knees bound to hunched bodies. "Gentlemen," said Conrad, hat tipped, "we've been expecting you." He shot a quick wink to me. "Sometimes a fella just knows." I quickly shied away and looked at Richard Bledsoe, John Gray, and the youngest fella by the name of Bill Prescott. They were all waiting like downtrodden dreamers. "Well," said Conrad, "here we are." He surveyed a low-hanging branch and broke off the limb that was roughly the same length and thickness of a cane. "I called, and you, the common men, the rank and file, yes, you answered. But before we delve into the details of legendary demons of the deep, a quick introduction, perhaps?" None of us wanted to heckle the performance. The giant folded his vivid arms. "My name is Conrad Conundrum, and for those of you who do not keep on the up and up with the circus circuit, I am the Conrad Conundrum of Conrad Conundrum's Traveling Sideshow Spectacular." Richard and John sighed in awe, though I knew for a fact that they'd never heard of him before. No, not him, not Barnum, not Bailey or Coop. They were simply not those sorts of men with those sorts of fascinations. They wanted honest work and a decent wage. Imagine that. And with the faintest sounds of clanking shovels in the seemingly eternal distance now, the man with both the whip and branch continued. "And please, allow me the great honor to introduce my esteemed colleague." He motioned towards the giant. "Meet my fair Fritz, or as he's known upon the poster bill, Fritz the Flame Breather." The tattooed behemoth nodded with the stone-cold humility and without a peep. Conrad strode over to us, waving his branch like a cane. "You see, my friends, Fritz and I have been on a survey, a hunt, if you will, a hunt for the next great attraction that will surely light up the eyes of our loyal attendees across the nation." He walked behind us and placed his hands on our shoulders, one by one. And when I stumbled upon good old Wexler County, he inhaled and pointed at what he alone saw past the trees. This county of toilers, this backbreaker's burg, yes, when I heard the legends wafting around the pubs and taverns and campfires, I looked out at that lake, dark and murky Lake Van Buren, with the stars in my eyes and the fear of something in my belly. But it's that same fear that'll galvanize the capture of that sly serpent, should it very well exist. And I believe the creature does. In my very soul, I believe it. I'm going to capture that thing, that beautiful, horrifying thing. And my show will be all the more spectacular when I do. Just think, Wexler, Baltimore, Philadelphia, Atlantic City, New York, the World's Fair. Who knows? We'll even go global with an exhibition like this. He breathed out and made his way back in front of us, a strange business sense in his voice now. Now, with all the formalities out of the bag, have you all any queries for me before we depart? The money, said Bill Prescott coldly. Ah, yes. Curt and to the point, I see. Yes. The money is ripe and plump for the plucking upon the completed task. And just when's this taking place? Said Bill. Conrad looked to the sky that was welcoming clusters of new clouds with eerie friendliness. Come again? Said Conrad distantly. When is this taking place? Said Bill again. Why, tonight, of course, said Conrad calmly. One doesn't drag his feet when dealing with the 100-year-old legend that should be the attraction of tomorrow. And as for your first question, the one about the money, well, I could sense your apprehension. All of you. Bill nodded surely and devoid of any cordiality. So, in order to appease all of your trepidations, I made a deposit in the banks of your uneasy vaults of old cloth. Call it a token of good faith, if you will. Go on, look, gander! Conrad signaled towards our pockets, and one by one, each man pulled out 2 crisp dollar bills in astonishment. He winked at me and said, You too, sonny boy. I reached in my pocket, and I swear to you on the unmarked grave of my long-gone father, I pulled out not 1, not 2, but 3 dollar bills from the pocket that previously held but 1. Was it childish to feel special at that moment? Such a silly sentiment, no? Now that I've gained your full attentions, let us be off. My fair Fritz, lead us onward. The giant led the enchanted cavalcade down the beaten path. We followed cautiously, not daring to pass his slow, deliberate steps. Conrad was at the rear. He spoke about 10 minutes into the trek. Any of you fellas from this Wexler County, perchance? No, said all of us in our own grunts and hisses. Interesting, he said. We were just here digging ditches for Uncle Sam, said John Gray as if we'd all been retired for centuries. New irrigation systems or something or the other. Irrigation, I chimed in. Irrigation systems. Oh, John Gray, I thought to myself with a fond smile. As the locals would say during our previous stint down in Savannah, Georgia, John Gray, bless his heart, that sweet man. I saw an ad in a pub back in Baltimore, said Richard. Had Teddy Roosevelt's face on it. Said something about steady traveling work for a guaranteed 3 months, so I came running. Ah, yes, said Conrad. Good to be with company who know the ups and downs, the storms of life on the road. I may have imagined it, but I do believe that a distant thunder thudded the moment that he spoke the word storms. We emerged from the forest and out into a gentle sloping plain of wheat, somewhere in a kind of pastoral wilderness of Wexler County, between the towns of Irondale, Old Jupiter, and Fairfield. We connected onto a gravel road that doubled as the fabric-like silhouette of the area, thin, curved, and wave-like, no doubt, from a bird's-eye view. Upon this new sloping path of sharp rocks were a few horse-drawn carriages that were rolling away in front of dust trails, and a lone policeman upon horseback. He was heading our way. The officer neared and stopped his dark brown stallion, and the tattooed giant stopped our procession. The policeman scanned us all. He did not hide his disgust, which was most visible in his look towards Fritz. Upon his horse, he was nearly eye level with him. Nearly. Just what in the blue blazes are you fellas up to? I don't know why I froze in dread. Perhaps I assumed we'd be arrested for some reason or another, therefore destroying all hopes of the $3,000 waiting for us. Fritz spoke not, colossal feet sitting still. Conrad rushed to the front of the line in somewhat of a hurry. "Greetings, officer," Conrad said, hat tipped. "The name's James Connolly. Reverend James Connolly." "Don't recognize your name or your face. State your business." "My business, yes. Well, you see, officer, I'm but a humble traveling preacher man, desperately trying to steer these wayward souls from their wicked ways, from all the drink and all the carousing and carnality we human beings so easily find ourselves entangled in." The officer looked as if his disgust outweighed his suspicion. One more glance at the giant and his bodily etchings, and it seemed the policeman was quite through. "All right, off with you. Don't go parading these ragamuffins around town. Wouldn't be prudent. Gotta maintain a healthy, wholesome community and all. Good day." Conrad smiled and bid the officer farewell. The lawman and his horse continued on and out of sight. Conrad addressed us. "My apologies, but we cannot have our quest squandered by the local badge boys." He looked down the plain and pointed to an old barn that stood connected to an empty dock at the bank of a massive lake. Conrad narrowed his eyes and pointed confidently. "There, my fellow Ahabs. There's our next stop." And so we continued on and eventually off the gravel road. We stepped through the slanted wheat towards the barn. The ground was oozing from moisture at every step, waiting for Conrad or Fritz to open the door beneath the soft sloshes of the lake. Oddly, the door did not bear a lock, only a triple-knotted strand of thick rope. Fritz took 2 red-handled daggers from his side and began to make incisions, two-bladed like a downtown butcher upon a fresh slab of pork. "Rope? You kiddin'?" said Bill skeptically. "Rope, yes, and kidding, most certainly not," said Conrad while Fritz flexed inked arms and tore thickets of threads. "But what you fail to see is that this here is not your poor man's noose, oh no. 'Tis a special strand of the Rhodesian sort, almost magical, only able to be cut by particular metal alloys, and even then—" He widened his eyes towards the sawing Fritz, but quickly smiled. The giant severed the loop of rope with a final tug of sheer ferocity. Conrad gripped the wooden handle while the rope still swayed and said, "Please, do come in." And in we went. The room was dank and dark, exuding several odors, some expected, such as tobacco, rotten wood, hay, and must, and others a bit more peculiar, such as gunpowder, maybe curry, cinnamon, sweet candies, and a whole slew of other things to which I could not fathom. Rows of trinkets and apparatuses were veiled in darkness, shimmering from an occasional droplet of light let in by sporadic holes in the walls. "Welcome," said Conrad. His face was more shadow than skin in that dim chamber. "Do watch your step. Looks like a storm's brewing, and these torches most certainly have their limits." While the others slowly stepped around the room, I looked up at the dark support beams that hung several feet above, and I saw them shake when thunder thudded against their unseen counterparts outside. "A drink," said Conrad when he led us across the room to a long, wide table. We stepped through the straw that could not be seen but only felt. As we walked, I glanced at the countless posters that hung from the cracked walls. The advertisements were vivid, though of a vintage sort, and because of the dimness I could only make out certain portions of them. They were shaded with yellows and reds and autumn leaf browns, boysenberry blues. There was a skeleton man here, a one-legged tightrope walker there, I even saw one unrolled bill boasting the image of the very man before us, his illustrated whip keeping a lion, tiger, and bear at bay all at once. I was the last to reach the corner of the room, and I rounded it to approach the table, and as I did, I felt some sort of fabric graze my hand. I looked down at what appeared to be some strange old doll sitting in a beat-up rocking chair, but the shadows and Conrad's calls both prevented me from greater inspection. "Sonny, this one's for you," said Conrad, standing by the table with the others, a lantern flickering faintly beside him. I obliged and grabbed the glass, which was 3 fingers full of brown liquid, and tipped it to him in gratitude. The others raised their glasses, and Conrad made a toast in the feeble glow. "To old legends and new fellowships." "Hear, hear," we said. We all drank, though I caught the silhouette of Fritz in the background. He was as stiff as the doll behind me. "Let's get right down to it, shall we?" said Conrad. "This creature, this demon, as some have called it, is expected to make its appearance at some time on this very eve." "How you know it'll be tonight, of all the nights?" said Bill Prescott. "Because, my sharp-tongued friend, a wise old sage told me so." "Which one?" John Gray said, as he kept fidgeting in the uncomfortable duskiness of the thundery room. "Familiar with many wise old sages?" said Conrad mockingly. "Well, I'll have you know that it was a spry young lady of 90 years old called Lady Evangeline who told me, just yesterday." Conrad looked around the room, almost annoyed, waiting for any other cheeky objections to deflect. Then he looked down at his white-gloved hand. That was it. How had I not noticed? His hand was a hand with 6 fingers, a pair of twins in the middle. He laughed, a fond, sorrowful chuckle. He told us of growing up with the oddity. How cruel children can be to others who display even the smallest inkling of being different from them. He continued, telling us how he joined a circus in Kansas City as a boy, when a man called Randolph convinced him he could display the extra finger with pride for pay. Conrad told us he left his grandparents behind without a second thought. I had high hopes as a lad that first summer. I did. But, unfortunately, it was all talk from Randolph. Yes. Shame. But I wouldn't be where I am today without joining that sideshow. Cleaning the latrines at every stop, learning the games, the faces, the muddy, mundane, spectacular magic of it all. And now look at me, in a dark, musty barn with you lot. We all laughed. "So what's our course?" I said after the laughter dwindled back to discomfort. I was trying to spend as little time in that ancient-smelling chamber as we must. It was hard to convey the brand of unease I felt from the place, as if a small part of myself desired to continue sitting in that fearful, faintly illuminated darkness. "What do you expect from us?" I said. "Ah, yes, our strategy, our course of action, Sonny?" "Well, you see, the plan is a simple one. Soon, a man called Finnegan will knock on that door, and when he does, we shall all follow him out to his boat and board it, and into the middle of the lake we'll venture. From there, we'll cast our nets and ropes and apparatuses into those murky waters, and when the time comes, that serpent will rear its ugly head and will strike." "Don't sound so easy," said Richard Bledsoe. Sir?" "But you see, simple and easy are often worlds apart, yes?" said Conrad. "Got any bait?" said Bill. "Come again?" "Any bait? Something to draw it to the surface? Well, you never fished before?" "The chap has a point. Eh, my fair Fritz?" said Conrad, resting his white hands on the dusty table. The stiff, towering silhouette only exhaled, unimpressed. "And the answer is yes." A closer gathering of thunderclaps thudded against the barn. And so, we'll coerce the demon, the monster of Lake Van Buren with... He sucked in air. Sassafras. Huh? Several of us muttered. "'Tis true," hissed a voice from behind me. I recoiled when the doll stood from the rocking chair and walked past me. "Gentlemen, meet Lady Evangeline, the matron of the deep Wexler marshlands." Conrad helped the tiny woman to the table. She appeared visually indistinguishable from an old colonial doll, both in size and fashion. She rifled through some sort of satchel slung over her tiny shoulder. I nearly pinched myself when I glanced around the room and thought about how damn strange the whole thing felt. The posters, the smells, the hanging torches that flickered from the thunder, it all seemed rather off, like an old grandfather clock that was more than a couple of minutes behind. Like a dream you can't quite remember. But when I nervously stuck my hand in my pocket and felt those crisp bills, I sighed. I can endure most anything for that sort of cash, not to mention the other 2,997 waiting for us on the other side of this excursion. It was only one night of honest work, right? "Come to me," said the matron mistily. "Come all who dare to dance with the demon tonight." Conrad motioned for us all to line up and face her. Fritz stood with Conrad at the end. I could see Bill Prescott's puzzled shadow. "What in the—" "Silence!" she screamed, a wiry arm outstretched. "Silence! On this, the night foretold, when the demon of the deep emerges, once but every decade, you all must be properly equipped." She held some bits of leaves and dark, chunky sand in her palms. The shadows made it difficult to see anything else. "May your efforts prove victorious upon the rowdy gales. Now close your eyes. All of you. Now!" Thunder clapped and lightning flashed through the cracks in the wood just before I shut my eyes. Or I should say. I simply had to see how it would all unfold. The lady stepped back to the edge of the table, starting at the end where Richard stood. "By the sweet seductions of our local sassafras's ancient scent and the potent power of our pursuer's powder," she reared back. "Be covered!" She slung the leafy powder straight into the face of Richard Bledsoe. I peeped over and saw him stagger and start to protest when she yelled even louder. "Silence! Not a muscle! All of you!" And we obeyed, spine chilled. She grabbed another handful from the satchel, and one by one, Lady Evangeline hurled the clumps at each man. Then her sights fell on me, and my baptism smacked me square in the nose. My nostrils bled a bit, but I took in the stinging sweetness mixed with foreign flavor. I stood firm. I thought I might sneeze, but my mind was racing. When she reached Fritz, her demeanor shifted to that of an awe-stricken zookeeper. She held out the powder and snapped the bony fingers of her free hand above it. A spark fluttered from the friction and ignited the pile into a soft green flame. "Inhale the kindle of ancient powers, O fire breather," she said softly. "I see kinship in you. We flow from the same fount." Fritz nodded and breathed in the flame. When I saw this, my forehead began to perspire. I gripped my pockets rather tight. The pitter-patter of the lady's tiny boots reached Conrad, who was at attention with his hands behind his coattails. He seemed spiritually focused. No facades or theatrics, merely his head bowed and brow fixed down in contemplation and reflection. "And you," she said in a special inflection. "The master of these wranglers, the guider of these huntsmen, you. Oh yes. It is you who shall surely illuminate those dark waters." I could see Conrad's pearly whites peeking through his grin as she ranted on. "Yes, by the power of the swamp both here and abroad, I enchant thee with a potent handful of immortality." I of the common folk bit my lip to keep from snickering at such speech. It is you, O conqueror of conundrums, who shall finally tame the wretched serpent and display it to the masses. For hope, for amusement, for intrigue, for survival. The lady did not throw her handful at Conrad, who still stood shut-eyed and smiling, but instead, she leaned in atop the table, mere inches from his face. She held the handful to her mouth and blew hypnotically. She swayed her head and kept breathing the powder over Conrad, who coughed and winced from the tiny dust storm, but remained upright, as if he were being electrocuted. I rolled my eyes behind an open lid and the closed one, but truthfully, I did not know what to make of the spectacle. Now, she said, her tiny hands lifted. Go and tame the monster! Yes, ma'am. And there you have it, said Conrad, panting. The time has come, my dears. The knock approaches. All was silent, and less than a minute later, there was a knock on the door. Come all! Fritz, our exit music. Pronto! I waited behind the rest of the men who followed Conrad's lead out the door. As I made our exit, I heard the sound of what was most certainly the eerie, playful chiming of a calliope in the far corner of the room. I clenched my pockets when I made my way to the door. It felt as if I couldn't get out of there fast enough. How incredibly strange, I thought when I stepped over the threshold. Strange, lovely, and terrifying. A man in an unkempt gray beard greeted us outside. He wore an old sailor's cap and a dark blue raincoat that was flailing violently. I looked up to the deep gray sky and wiped the sweat from my brow. The clouds were angry and bloated and ready for a wrathful release. All right, yelled the captain, called Finnegan beneath the rumblings of the impending storm. We're about to board the Zephyr. He pointed to the dock. A long, tall barge nearly the size of the barn writhed in the restless waves. It's powered by steam and owned by me. You do what I say no matter what. If I say cast, you cast. If I say pull, you pull. And if I say dance, then you'll do your best vaudeville shuffle, understood? We all nodded, puzzled, and I believe I saw Conrad wink. Let's go. We jogged behind Captain Finnegan and scaled the slope down the tiny remnant of the wheat hill until we reached the vessel. When it was my turn, I stepped feebly onto the bobbing ladder, much less than confident that I'd make it aboard. I sighed when I did and quickly scurried over to the side of the boat. I felt more perspiration on my face. I saw Conrad slipping something into Finnegan's hand before fastening his hat and gripping his whip. If you're the sleeve-rolling type, now will be your time to shine, said Conrad, readjusting his orange ascot. We all braced ourselves along the railing as Captain Finnegan cranked the boat to life. 3,000 was the number I chanted in my mind over and over. 3,000. I wiped my brow once more before we set off into the dark, choppy waters of Lake Van Buren. It was a rather hefty body of water, a mighty mass. As we departed from our miniature gulf and headed further into vacant water, I surveyed the crew. Some looked uneasy, but not Conrad, who appeared as a groom at the altar. I glanced up at Finnegan, who stood atop his control nest. His grumpy eyes were slits of concentration, scanning the waters as if searching for a trespasser. I suppose he was. Suppose we all were. 3 flashes and thunderclaps interjected, nearly one on top of the other. Unknown, eternal moments of anxious, steam-fueled time passed before we reached the epicenter of the lake. Finnegan dwindled the engine to a mere purr and barked above the loud stirrings of the clouds. You're in my sanctuary now. You all got that? We nodded. Now we mesh with the waters and wait. This lake's got the River Jennings running through it. It's an artery to the Atlantic, That being said, there's no telling what type of creature might have made its way into here after years and years. I gripped the railing as the waves continued to pound, unrelentingly so. The equipment is all accounted for over there. He pointed to a huge mass of thick ropes, cables, nets, and what appeared to be some sort of rolled-up tarpaulin contraption that dangled over the side. So, we're gonna wait right here, in the dead center of this lake, until we spot the thing. He yelled above the thunder. Keep your eyes peeled, and if you spot it, well, open your mouth for heaven's sake! What if we can't tame it? Asked John Gray worriedly. No such thing, said Finnegan confidently from above. Conrad shot a look that only we down in the lower deck could catch. It was a facade of pure, brazen rebellion. He shook his head, chuckled, and said, Gentlemen, eyes on the waters. Stay silent unless you see something. We spread out across the boat. I gripped the cold railing next to John Gray. Richard and Bill assumed the other side. Conrad stood at the bow, his boot propped up on a pile of rope. Fritz was not far away. And so, we watched. There was an eerie calm in that lake. Between the claps and strikes on that eve, my eyes shot to any break in the waves, any bobbing log or floating chunk of debris. I do not know how many minutes passed with silence, but they were many. You think... Richard started. Shh, said Conrad from the front. Now is the calm, my dear man. Now is the courtship. The affectionate gaze before the enchanted dance. Just how we gonna move this thing if we catch it? Asked Bill defiantly. I will forgive your impertinence. He lowered his voice. Yes, lest we disturb this sacred moment. When we have our catch in our clutches, then our kinfolk will reveal themselves. Isn't that so, my fair Fritz? It is, said Fritz frigidly. We kept our eyes peeled, and the storm continued to swell. By then, the moonlight was peeking through the clouds, scattering galaxies of glittery, glowing speckles all over the waves. More time passed with uneasy tensions, strange, vague, nameless anticipations, to the soft up and down of the steamboat's purr. Finnegan, my good sir, do cut the steam completely, yes? I don't think... Conrad waved another cut of crisp green paper in the air, and the engine fell silent. Most of us turned and watched Conrad stand at the furthest point of the boat, resting his gray panted knees on the railing as he peered out into the depths. Fritz, if you will, said Conrad strangely, in a voice of one giving a eulogy. The tattooed giant handed over a knife and a small leather pouch. By sassafras and the blood of my own flowing veins, O beast, I do come to woo you! He slit his palm without a flinch. The cut was deep and ripe with red offerings through the white glove. Then he grabbed a handful of dark, chunky powder, the same powder from the barn, and smeared it in his crimson palm. I crinkled my nose at the sight. I could hear Finnegan puff in disapproval. Oh, yes, said Conrad, kneading the thick, leafy dust and blood like some sort of freakish dough. When he felt that his recipe was perfected, he took the ball of bloody filth and held it over the edge. Verily, verily, I say, O demon, show yourself! He crumbled up the wad as if it were a brittle cookie and dropped it, and it flowed and floated down into the water. We waited. The mixture floated in the moonlight. Still we waited. Up to that very moment, I can assure you that I was unequivocally an unbeliever in this monster. But the moon, and the madness and the mystery of it all seemed to grab me by the throat. My heart quickened, and I found it difficult to breathe. Could such a terror truly lurk down there? How on God's good green earth would one react to such a horror? No. These were concerns forever banished to remain buried between children's books. Fairy tale hogwash, yes? Not in the here and now. Not slithering just below the surface of the very lake we were prisoners of at present. I kept looking at the floating powder, which had now drifted over to my side. I rubbed my eyes and opened them wider, wiping away the tears. A dark blip of shadow spread from within the depths beneath the dusty water. Words cannot convey such helpless terror, such potent dread, such zaps of aimless alarm. Was the moon retreating behind the clouds? I reared up. It was beaming in its full, unashamed glory. Again, I peered back to the floating grime, and again I saw the shadow, no longer a blip, but now a mass. Mr. Conundrum? I called cautiously, feeling the urge to vomit. Fellows, do come see this. The swift shuffles of boots scurried over to my position. I pointed to the expanding splotch of shadow. It was swelling faster, like the unfurling of a colossal curtain. Ready yourselves, said Finnegan. Not a blink until I say. It grew well beyond the sides of our vessel. The sting of salt burned my eyes and I wiped my brow. I frantically attempted to make some sort of peace with the world beyond our own. Bigger it grew. Something burst forth. Waves smashed against the barge. I fell back to the deck and looked up. The grand head of a dark beast blotted out my view of the moon. Its long neck towered above and curled and contorted. I shrieked. The steamboat cranked to life and Finnegan yelled frantically. Now! All hands cast the lines! Grab and toss at my command! I crawled across the deck and lunged for the equipment with the others, wincing and terrified that I might be stricken at any moment. The heavens boomed, but a much deeper thunder bellowed from the beast. But then it plunged back below the surface. Finnegan leapt down the steps and quickly fiddled with the rope and cable lines, fastening as fast as the lightning above. He connected the long black roll of tarpaulin to the single main line and barked for us to assume our positions. At his command, we each hurled our connected ends out into the water, creating a floating, corral-like formation of linked rope. When it comes back up, you all pull like hell, yelled Finnegan, out of breath. We held our lines, white-knuckled. Fritz held two lines at once like string. Steady, said Finnegan. The monster sprang forth again, and my pure, fearful repulsion never waned from such a happening. Now! I pulled with all my might, as did everyone else, save for Conrad. The tarpaulin and ropes made contact with the elongated neck of the beast, which forced it forward, straight into the boat into a horrifying embrace to the side of the steam engine. I nearly ripped the rope. The monster's face was an arm's length away from me. I winced and shrieked at what I saw. Nestled in the center was a lone eye of glossy white, surrounded by a vertical slit of black. I saw no mouth, no nostrils, but I felt a rumble beneath us. Hold steady, lads, yelled Finnegan. Connection! The captain pulled the main line from the nucleus of the boat. One by one, he approached each flexing man and clamped each rope to the metal fasteners, and with a final clank, the ropes were married to the boat's clutches. Good God! Said John Gray as he scurried away from the flailing face when our grips were released. Surely it's the devil himself! Conrad laughed, wide-eyed and wonderstruck. He walked over to where the monster's face was still wrestling, whip in hand and calm. He stepped softly, his arms outstretched. He stood mere inches from the massive face, its eye glinting with the true, indecipherable intensity. Not much longer, yes, said Conrad. I watched from our huddle near the stern as Conrad looked around in the open night air. He continued to scan, not at all wincing at the beast's powerful objections. And then his eyes found that which they were searching for. Our kinfolk await. There was a line of torches at a break in the wooded shoreline. Captain, would you say that our catch is secure for transfer? Think so, he said, out of breath from atop the steering deck. Then onward, said Conrad, all but kissing the monster. The steamboat adjusted course and moved through the waves towards the torches. I could feel the boat strain under the weight of the attached Leviathan. The creature seemed to have temporarily ceased its resistance, though faint rumbling sounds still murmured from below. If only my heart would slow. When we neared the shore, I surveyed the landscape. An enormous cage, 3 times the size of our barge, was sitting in the water, half submerged and ajar. It was attached to a hefty carriage back on land nearby, which adorned at least a dozen stallions at its reins. But as we got even closer, I saw the strange silhouettes of those who were holding the torches. It was a waiting party of sideshow freaks. No doubt some of the same ones that were illustrated upon the posters at the barn. Heights, shapes, sizes varied drastically, but they all had one thing in common. Their cacophonous, unintelligible chatter sent shivers up my spine. How do you want to proceed? Said Captain Finnegan as we neared the cage that was 10 boats length from us. Would it prove such a conundrum to make such a transfer? Our new beauty into that massive water-filled tank? Said Conrad, grinning. Nope, replied Finnegan. Just have to steer this old thing to an angle. Once the stern's aligned with the tank, the big devil should just swim right in after the line's severed. You hear that, my fair Fritz? I did, sir. Can you manage such a maneuver? I can, sir. Very good, said Conrad, reaching into his breast pocket as he climbed the steps up to the deck. Only his voice was with us now. I suppose all that's left is payment. Thank you for your services, Captain. We rested upon the lower deck and sighed in relief at the thought. The monster stared coldly from its bindings, as if knowing its destiny, to strike fear into the hearts of all the world, and not just a local lake. A shot pierced through the night from atop the deck, a thick thud from above, and the boat rumbled to a standstill. We scurried to the steps, but a dagger ripped through the air and stabbed into the wood ahead. We reared. Fritz the fire breather was standing before us, his waist 1 dagger short. He shook his head with his arms folded. I could hear faint murmurs and possibly even laughter from the shore. Yes, came Comrade's muffled, echoing voice from above. Paid in full, Captain. Next up, we have John Gray, I do declare. It's time to claim your hard-earned reward. I grabbed John's wrist as I would a child's before he was about to walk in front of a stampede. Fritz growled and readied 2 fresh moonlit daggers. Slowly, sorrowfully, I let go of his wrist. John, good sir, your bounty awaits, said Conrad. John Gray nodded and stood, and slowly stepped up the wobbly steps like a tiny fraction of himself thought only good things awaited for him up there. I closed my eyes. There came something like a pulling, click sound. Another shot. Another thud. Sweat and tears married and became as one upon my face. I shut my eyes. Richard? Yes, come reap the fruits of your labor, Sir Richard. I could hear him crying next to me when he too arose and ascended the steps. A pull and click. A shot. A thud. Bill. Oh, Mr. Prescott. I do look forward to bestowing upon you tokens well above and beyond your merit. But when I peeked my eyes open, Bill Prescott was standing tall and erect, his face emotionless. The captured monster rumbled. It seemed it was regaining its strength. "Bill, now please," said Conrad like a school teacher. "Come now. Come on up." "No," he said before spitting. But Fritz would have none of it. He walked over to Bill and yanked him by the hair and flung him up the steps. I heard a few more potent curses from Bill Prescott. The gun fired, and it fired a second time. Then the thud sealed the matter. I stood below in a desperate panic, heartbroken and heart pounding. I readied my stance to leap over the edge when... And who could forget about Sonny? Sonny, old boy, do join us up here, won't you? Something impulsive, something stupid even leapt up inside my chest. It told me to obey. I slowly made my way up the steps, thinking that if I could only endure the rants and veiled threats of this maniac for but a few more moments, I could possibly collect that was truly owed to me and run for much brighter pastures. Pastures full of possibilities, beyond digging ditches or hunting demons. Just maybe. So I climbed the steps. When my boot reached the top deck, I felt a squish and plop. I looked down at the pool of blood that had all mixed into one mass from several tributaries that led from 4 tangled bodies, all of which had been alive and well just mere blinks back. I couldn't bear the sight. I looked up. Fritz was at a slight angle behind the wheel, fixing the controls to move forward. Conrad held a revolver, its barrel staring me dead in the face. I lifted my hands, a tried and true fool. "Sorry, Sonny, but when you're in an industry as tough as mine, you have to know when to cut your losses." He pulled back the pistol's hammer. I turned my head and shut my eyes. Wait, his revolver was a 6-shot, correct? I thought frantically between the pondering of the entire scope of my existence in a single breath. How many rounds could he have left in that little thing? 1? 2 at the maximum? In a blink of rebirth, in the faintest blip of time before the shot, I snapped my head left and leapt away. The muzzle flash nearly blinded me, and my ears surged with a dull, numbing pain. I yanked 2 daggers from the back of Fritz's waist and slashed at Conrad. He ducked and struck me across the face with the butt of his pistol. As we scuffled, Fritz joined in, leaving the ship to coast slowly down towards the open tank. I felt the huge, powerful grip of Fritz's palms around my neck. The 3 of us tussled and slammed against the edge that overlooked the lower deck. I swiped with what little strength I had left, to no avail, so I forced myself over the edge, bringing Conrad and Fritz down with me. We slammed onto the wood, which winded us all, but soon, Fritz towered above me. I scurried away on my back until my head dinged against the corner of the black apparatus that held the main line, which kept the beast fastened against the boat. I parried the smack of a whip that nearly blinded me greater than the gunshot flash. Cried Fritz, swinging a tattooed arm towards me. I ducked. He smashed the slab of boat with a stark thump. I looked at the monster. It was stirring. Then I looked at the single rope that held all the others. Just as Fritz reared his fist back for a second blow, I began sawing away at the rope with both the knives and all my might. I severed the line just as Fritz's fist pummeled me in the back of my head. I fell to my side in a daze. With the main line torn, every rope weakened and slid downward. I saw the distant trees swerve as the boat coasted and bumped into the floating tank. The monster must have seen this, and I reared back from the dead ropes in frantic shock. "No, no!" Conrad cried. He lunged for the beast, but Fritz stopped him and signaled that he would make the amends. The giant grabbed 3 of the dangling lines, desperately searching for the other 2. The monster reared its head back, free and untethered, which yanked Fritz and sent him dangling over the edge. And to my dazed horror, a second neck identical to the first sprang forth. They were limbs for the thing's eyes. We'd only captured the monster's eye. Then I saw the source of the rumbles. A mouth peeked up, and teeth the length of shovels protruded from a round abyss of vile roars. A pit of certain living doom. Fritz hung from the railing in angry defiance. With one arm free, the giant snapped his finger and turned towards the beast, spitting little bursts of fire, feeble flames of desperate defense, with the slightest shade of green in their gleams. But after a few cautious winces, the monster reared its full, true face back, mouth agape, eyes dancing about, and snapped down upon the tattooed giant. I shut my eyes to the horrific, grinding sound, which suddenly became muffled. Because it had started to rain. After mere moments, I looked across the deck again, through the thick, misty downpour. Past the drenched gray back of a dumbfounded Conrad, I saw the monster of Lake Van Buren slither away from the rocking barge. Its eyes, propped up by their neck-like limbs, shot a final, terrifying gaze of moonlit majesty before plummeting beneath the waters once more, leaving the vessel with a violent shudder. The rain poured, and shouts and deranged cries resounded from the shore. I stood, staring at Conrad Conundrum, whose back was still to me. I approached, 2 knives in hand, hands that did not feel like my own. He turned around. His drenched face was one of utter loss, a chilling, maniacal loss. You, he started in a whisper. You! He continued louder as he stepped towards me. You! He lunged. I did not parry, but merely let the knives rest in my hands just as they were. He met the cold embrace of 2 sharp blades. He paused. We both looked down. The knives were sunken into his chest. I do not know how I felt while gripping the 2 red handles that stuck from his navel and left lung. But sadly, strangely, he grabbed me with his blood-stained gloves, 5 fingers on one hand, 6 on the other, and he embraced me. We shuffled over to the edge, almost in a strange slow dance in the rain, blood spewing between us. He looked at me, with mere seconds of life left in his wide, sun-yellow eyes, and said, Sonny, send me into the lake of fire, would you? I want to go home. I want to go home now. I gave a gentle push. Conrad Conundrum careened over the edge of the boat and smacked the water and sank into the abyss, whip in fist. I heard shouts and screeches through the downpour. I staggered up the steps to the steering deck and smashed down the main lever, not possessing the slightest clue as to its proper operation. It turned left and right like a drunkard. I kept it blazing through the waters, full speed until the tank and torches were out of sight. I let the barge drift to any shadowy shoreline it desired, scraping against the shallow, rocky earth. When I approached, I leapt from the top frantically, thumping my knee in the shallow depths. I treaded water until it became land, and I fell to the ground. I lay there, prostrate with twigs and pebbles in my slobbery mouth, my head wedged into the sand. I began to weep. I mumbled the names of the men aboard the barge. Dead and gone. After quite some time, I sat up. I pulled out the $3 bills from my pocket and tossed them to the dirt. Through misty eyes, I peered out at the moonlit, rain-trodden waves of Lake Van Buren. I could not break the stare. I sat and pressed my back to an old rotted stump, my eyes still inextricably bound to those dark depths. Oblivious to the rain, I pulled out the matchbook that Joseph Honeycutt had given me. I swiped the impotent matches against the soggy material numbly. Still, I stared out beneath the torrential tempest in a dumb, dazed hope, wishing wishing that nothing would spring forth from those depths ever again. I felt the side of my head, and I would have shouted and cursed and gone into hysterics had it been any other night than this one, when I realized that I hadn't come out of this whole hellish experience completely unscathed. Maybe it was all in my head, or maybe it was my nerves, but I couldn't seem to feel my left ear. I couldn't seem to hear out of it either. One last gift from the man with the whip. It's been hours since it all transpired. Hours that seemed like months. And I'm still sitting here on the rainy shore of Lake Van Buren, shivering, bloodied, soaked to the bones and out of my wits. Yes. Yes, I'm still here. After the monster emerged. Hello, you. Look who's back. Can you see me? I'm just kidding, sort of. It's been a while, friends. How are you? Answer me. Okay, I know you're mad. I know you're upset and you haven't been able to function, that I've been gone for so long. I'm sorry. You know, I knew this was gonna divide my audience, but you three are just gonna have to be okay with it. Especially you, Mom and Dad. Anyway, gang, I hope you enjoyed that story titled The Monster of Lake Van Buren, which I've got to say really quick, shout out to the new southernfugitives.com, who first published a previous version of the story sometime back, I think last Halloween. So thank you all for giving me a chance to show this story to people, to humans, about monsters. And if you haven't noticed by now, my usual preamble is at the end of the story. I'm trying something new. I thought, what am I going to call it? A post-amble? That's stupid. So, it's going to be called the epilogue. I mean, the epilogue. You know, at the end of a story. I don't know, there's just something about the element of surprise! I apologize for that. I'll give you a chance to change thine undergarments. But for realsies, there's something about the element of surprise in stories that I think is probably one of the most valuable things, especially in fiction. So I enjoy doing the preambles, but I enjoy more having that first line. So that being said, I'm going to try and do the epilogue at the end of every story and maybe talk about what went into it, the inspiration, stuff like that. So it's the best of both worlds, you know? You got that first line for the story, and then you can talk about it after. So let's talk about this one. I hope you are still here. That's the whole point of the epilogue, right? Knock on wood. The wood of the epilogue. Ooh, that's cool. That is staying. But for real, let's get to this. It's Halloween, after all, where we honor monsters and not be mad at each other, to quote The Office. And if you are not already wildly aware, my fear, or one of my fears, it's really strange. I mean, most people say public speaking or heights or spiders, which I'm actually afraid of all those things too. But my weirdest fear is monsters in the water. I mean, how obscure, like, seriously. Like, I can trace it back to when I first was watching a show back in the late 90s. I don't know if anybody remembers it, but it was called Nova. It was on PBS or one of those. We didn't have cable, so we had the rabbit ears. I don't know how old you are, so if you don't know what I'm saying, just throw your iPod in the trash. Or anyway, I was watching Nova by myself, and that it's like a science show, and it's kind of like National Geographic, I would say. And so it comes on, and it's kind of late at night, and I'm by myself, and there's an episode on something called the Loch Ness Monster. And I don't know, it terrified me. Like, the fact that there was even the smallest possibility of some unknown giant monster in a body of water. I mean, even back then I knew about whales and sharks and all that stuff, but that stuff didn't seem scary to me because it was all documented and studied and well known. I think there's something about the deep, dark depths of an ocean or a lake and some creature being down there. I mean, it could be anything. So that terrified me, absolutely terrified me. It still does, actually, in a strange, goofy way. Like, you know how you, like, one of those fears where you tense up and everything feels kind of numb around you and your heart starts beating super fast? That's how it is for me, for any kind of body of water that with a monster in it. That's really weird, but that's me. I even went on a trip to Loch Ness with my dad, and we stood on the shore of it. I mean, it's a beautiful lake. Scotland is beautiful, but also terrifying. And I knew that if I saw anything coming out of that lake, I would be back in the States without a plane. I would have swam in 5 seconds of how terrified I was. This is a random side note, but I love Napoleon Dynamite, especially his current event. I don't know if you remember that, but when he goes up there and he says, I'm going to try to recall it the best I can. This is my impression of him. Last week, Japanese scientists place explosives at the bottom of Lake Loch Ness to blow Nessie out of the water. Sigurd Godfrey of the Nessie Alliance summoned the power of Scotland's local wizards to cast a protective spell over our underwater ally. I did that off the top of my head, so it might not be perfect, but I love that movie, and I love how he talks like that. So, long story short, and I mean long story, I understand. I appreciate you guys listening to an extra long episode. I originally wanted to divide it into 2 parts, but I couldn't do it with the momentum of the story and the pacing. So, forgive me. And I hate dividing things into 2 parts. For a couple reasons. One, just kidding. And there you have the inspiration and the story behind today's episode. I would love it if you could reach out, if you wanted to reach out and tell me what you guys fear. No matter how silly or serious. I guess none of them are really silly if it actually makes you scared. And there's something fun but dangerous and fun again about Halloween. That's why I like it so much. We get to delve into fear and kind of darker things. And it's okay, we can't get in trouble. So that being said, I'm glad to be back. And I don't know how often I'm going to be able to upload new episodes, but I'd love to just keep doing it as much as I can. and having fun doing it. And I appreciate you guys listening. And as a podcast host, as a writer, as a former blogger, as an even more former ticket taker at the movie theater in the year 2006, I've been known to have a way with, like words or whatever. So I'll use those last words to say this. Don't forget to stay up to date with all the latest and greatest and several stories high stuff on social media. That's at SSH Pod or Shpod if you prefer. Just remember there's 2 S's. And also, I would love it if you could visit our website. Why do I keep saying our? It's just me. Whatever. The website is in the works. I'm doing some remodeling, as it were. But it is very easy to get to the website. All you have to do is go to www.ask.com. And then once that pulls up, pull up their search bar. Then type into their search bar, take me to yahoo.com. Once that pulls up, go to Yahoo search bar and type in, please direct me to AOL.com. That's America Online. Once America Online loads, type into that search bar, please take me back to Yahoo. I don't know what I have done. Once Yahoo loads, type into their search bar, please take... Please take me to Bing.com. And once Bing loads up, all you have to do is go to their search bar and type in, take me to Google.com, please. Once the Google page comes up, go to images and then click back to the normal web thing. Go back to I'm feeling lucky. And then go back to the web thing again and say, take me to myspace.com. MySpace will pull up, and you'll know why no one's on there anymore. I'm just kidding. It's an amazing, innovative site. From myspace.com, type in Yahoo links. There should be a link to Yahoo. So from there, go to Yahoo search bar. I want you to type in, please log into my Gmail. A Gmail link will come up. If you have a Gmail, log into that. If you don't have one, create an email. From that email, I want you to email yourself a reminder to go on google.com. And on google.com, I want you to say, several stories high. And once several stories high pulls up, all the billion articles and amazing reviews, I want you to click on the link for the website. My website. The website for our podcast where you can stay up to date. I want to have some merchandise soon. I want to do all sorts of things. So that website, again, very simple to go to. It's www.severalstorieshigh.com. And I don't want to toot my own horn, but you might like it. You might not. Or you might think it's okay. Anyway, gang, thank you so much for stopping by for another episode. I'm looking forward to the next one. And this has been your friend, your confidant, your host, your narrator, and other things, Nathaniel David Knox. Until next time.